Have you ever realized you're the side chick while lying in his bed, wearing his shirt, thinking you're his girlfriend? I'm talking about that gut punch moment when the air in the room changes, when the warmth of his arms stops feeling like comfort and starts feeling like a cage. 1 minute, you're tangled up in the sheets, breathing in his scent, your head resting on his chest like you've done 100 times before. You're tracing lazy circles on his skin, believing, no, knowing, you're where you belong. And then, without warning, it hits you. A flicker, a sound, a sentence you overheard but didn't fully register until now, a message you weren't meant to see, a laugh in the middle of the night when you thought he was sleeping, and suddenly, you can't breathe. It's like the walls close in around you. The shirt you're wearing, his shirt, suddenly feels like it's suffocating you. Your stomach twists so violently you can't tell if you're about to cry or throw up. Because in that split second, the truth crashes over you. You're not the leading lady. You're not the main chapter. You're the footnote, the secret, the mistake. And the worst part? You didn't walk into this knowing you were second best. You believed him, you believed in you and him. But now you're lying there, wondering how long you've been living in someone else's story, playing a role you never auditioned for. My name is Ava. I'm 30 years old. And for months, I thought I was dating a good man who valued honesty. Let's just call him Michael. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He was the kind of man who remembered how I liked my coffee and would warm my car for me on cold mornings. The kind of man who made my friends say, "You deserve this. He's solid." But here's the thing about people who seem perfect. Sometimes they're just really good at making sure you don't see the cracks. It started small. Michael had been different, distracted, like his body was in the room, but his mind was somewhere else. I'd catch him staring at his phone with this private smile, the kind you get when someone says something just for you. And whenever I'd walk over, he'd casually flip his phone face down. He started canceling plans at the last minute, too. There was always a perfectly reasonable excuse. Work running late, a friend in crisis, a headache. Never enough to accuse him of anything, but enough to make me feel like I was on the bottom of some invisible priority list. And then there was the social media thing. In the early days, he posted photos of us. Nothing over the top, just normal couple stuff. Brunches, hikes, the occasional inside joke in the captions. But then, the posts stopped. If we went out, his phone stayed in his pocket. If we took a picture, it never saw the light of day. When I asked why, he'd shrug and say, "Not everything needs to be online. Before you judge me, I'm not the type to jump to conclusions." My last relationship ended because I ignored my gut. I brushed off the late nights, the vague stories, the inconsistencies, until one day I found out I'd been living in a fantasy. I promised myself I would never do that again. So, when my instincts kicked in this time, I paid attention. The breaking point came one night when we were watching a movie at his place. Halfway through, Michael got up to grab more popcorn, leaving his phone on the coffee table. Unlocked. I didn't plan on snooping, but then I saw it. A notification lit up the screen from someone named Chloe. The preview read, "Same time next week?" 4 words. That's all it took. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might be sick. I froze. I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't open the message. I just stared at it, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the TV in the background. It could have been about anything, right? A work meeting, a gym session, dinner plans with a platonic friend. That's what I told myself, because the alternative, the one my gut was screaming at me, was too big to handle in that moment. And here's the worst part. I was already in deep with him. We spent almost every weekend together. I'd met his friends, he'd met my family. My apartment still smelled faintly of his cologne from the night before. Walking away wouldn't just mean losing him, it would mean undoing a life I'd been carefully building for the past year. So I did what a lot of people do when they're standing on the edge of the truth. I stepped back. I told myself there had to be an explanation. I just didn't realize that explanation would blow my life apart. If you've ever been burned before, you'll understand this. After my last relationship ended in betrayal, I swore I'd never let myself get blindsided again. That one broke me. It wasn't just the cheating, it was the months I spent gaslighting myself, convincing myself my gut was wrong when it was screaming the truth in my face. So, when I met Michael, I came in with eyes wide open. I told myself, look for the red flags. Listen to your instincts. Don't ignore the signs like last time. Michael seemed like the antidote to everything I'd just been through. He wasn't the loud, in-your-face type. He had this quiet confidence, a steady job in marketing, a calm way of speaking that made you feel heard, and a habit of actually remembering things you told him. He wasn't love-bombing me. He wasn't showering me with constant grand gestures that burn out fast. He was just consistent, reliable. The kind of man who texted home safe after a date and meant it. From the start, he felt safe. We didn't race into things. We built up slowly, midweek dinners, long Sunday walks, cooking together in his flat. Within a few months, we were planning little trips. It felt stable, solid, the kind of relationship you could build a future on. That's why, when the first crack appeared, I didn't want to believe it meant anything. We'd been planning a weekend away for weeks, somewhere quiet by the coast, just the two of us. The morning we were meant to leave, he called. I could tell straight away something was off in his voice. Babe, I'm so sorry. I can't make it. Work's just blown up. I've got a client emergency I can't ignore. I was disappointed, sure, but I told myself these things happen. Work emergencies aren't exactly a smoking gun. And yet, there was a flicker in my gut. That tiny whisper of something's not right. I pushed it down. I reminded myself, you promised not to let paranoia ruin something good. The next week, I was meeting him for lunch, and he offered to pick me up. When I slid into the passenger seat, my hand brushed against something in the door pocket. A small, colorful plastic dinosaur. I looked at him, holding it up. What's this? He glanced over, casual as anything. Oh, my niece's. I took her to the park last weekend. She must have left it. It made sense. Michael had mentioned his sister's kids before. I nodded, tossed it back in the pocket, and didn't think much of it. At least, not outwardly. Inside, something tightened. We hadn't been away the weekend before. He'd been working. So when exactly had this park trip happened? And why hadn't he mentioned it? This is the part where people like to chime in with, how could you not know? Or I would have walked away right then. So let me say this. Before you judge me, understand this. I'd been in toxic relationships before. I knew how easy it was to let insecurity and overthinking destroy something. I didn't want to sabotage what felt like the healthiest relationship I'd ever had. So I chose to believe him. I told myself, it's just a toy. It's just a missed weekend. It's just work. I kept showing up for him the way I always had. We went back to our normal rhythm. Dinners, nights in, Sunday walks. On the surface, it looked like nothing had changed. But in the quiet moments, when he thought I wasn't paying attention, I started to notice things. Like the way he'd be on his phone late at night, lying next to me in bed, smiling at the screen. Sometimes he'd chuckle under his breath. I'd glance over, and he'd tilt the phone away, still grinning. Who's that? I'd ask lightly. Just a mate, he'd say. No explanation, no name. Then he'd kiss my forehead and change the subject. It wasn't proof, not yet. But it was enough to bring that old familiar knot back into my stomach. And the thing about knots, they only tighten with time. It happened on one of those nights that start off so ordinary you'd never expect them to be the ones that change everything. We'd been watching a film at his place, something forgettable that we both kept talking over. By the time I decided to head home, the temperature had dropped, and Michael insisted I take his hoodie for the walk. Keep it, he said, draping it over my shoulders. It looks better on you anyway. The next day, I tossed it in my bag to return to him later. But when I pulled it out, something small and crumpled slid from the pocket. At first, I thought it was just a receipt for groceries or petrol. It wasn't. The logo was from a high-end Italian restaurant in the city, the kind of place you book weeks in advance. I skimmed down and froze. 2 entrees, 2 mains, 2 glasses of wine, the date printed at the top. Last Thursday, I was out of town that night, visiting a friend. Michael had sent me a goodnight text around 10 p.m., saying he was having an early one after a long workday. Now, I was staring at proof that he'd been having dinner for 2. And it wasn't with me. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Restaurants host business dinners all the time. Clients, colleagues. But the detail that stuck in my throat was the wine. Michael didn't drink with clients. He was always going on about keeping sharp for work. When I saw him later, I brought it up casually, holding the receipt out with a small smile. You spoil your clients with wine now? He barely glanced at it. Oh, yeah, that was with a client. Big deal on the line. You know how it is. Then he kissed me, changed the subject, and started talking about where we should go for brunch. Just like that. If I were smart, I'd have pressed. I'd have asked who the client was, what the deal was, why it looked so much like a date. But the way he brushed it off made me feel petty for even asking. I didn't want to be the insecure girlfriend sniffing around for problems. So I let it go. At least, I told him I did, but I couldn't shake it. That night, lying in bed, the receipt sat in my mind like a stone in my shoe. No matter how I shifted, I couldn't get comfortable. The following week, the truth didn't creep in. It kicked the door down. It was late on a Tuesday when my phone buzzed. A message request on Instagram from a woman I didn't know. No profile picture, no mutual friends. Just a single line. Hey, are you seeing Michael? I stared at it for a full minute before replying. Why? Her response came almost instantly. Because I'm his girlfriend. We've been together for years. We live together. My chest tightened so hard, it felt like my ribs were closing in. I read it again, convinced I was missing something. Sarcasm, a joke, some mistake. I typed back slowly, I think you've got the wrong person. She sent a photo, her and Michael, in what looked like his living room. The sofa I'd sat on 100 times, his arm around her, smiling like he did with me. The caption, 3 years, and counting, my hands went cold. I wanted to throw my phone across the room, to scream, to demand answers from someone, anyone. But all I could do was stare at the screen, my thoughts ricocheting between disbelief and nausea. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't an ex who couldn't move on. This was current, ongoing, real. I didn't even know what to ask her next. She filled the silence herself. I found your photo in his messages. You were at his place last weekend, weren't you? And just like that, every shared moment, the dinners, the trips, the lazy Sundays, twisted into something grotesque. They weren't my love story anymore. They were stolen scenes from hers. I had been the other woman all along. And the sickest part? I hadn't even auditioned for the role. In one sentence, I thought, my entire love story just turned into someone else's affair. I didn't wait. The second I saw Michael the next day, I confronted him. No warm hello, no small talk. I just put my phone on the table with the messages pulled up. He didn't even look nervous. Instead, he exhaled like I'd just asked him if he'd left the oven on. She's crazy, Ava, he said, shaking his head with a small, dismissive laugh. We've been over for months. She just can't let go. I blinked at him. She says you live together. He leaned back in his chair like this was all beneath him. She's obsessed. I've told her it's done. She's probably just jealous that I've moved on. Every word felt rehearsed. Too smooth, too easy. But the way he looked at me, steady and unflinching, made me falter. She sent me a photo, I pressed. From your living room. Michael rolled his eyes. Yeah, because she's been dragging her stuff out for months. She still has a key. She comes over when I'm not there. She knows exactly what she's doing, trying to make you think there's something going on. It was such a clean explanation. I almost wanted to thank him for making it make sense. Almost. She told me you've been together for 3 years, I said quietly. He reached across the table, took my hand, and lowered his voice. Ava, please don't let her ruin this. You and I have something real. She's bitter. She's hurt. And if you let her get into your head, you're just giving her what she wants. The words hooked straight into my guilt. I didn't want to be the woman who ruined something good because she couldn't trust. I didn't want to prove him right about me being paranoid or insecure. And Michael knew that. Over the next few days, he doubled down. Every time I brought it up, he'd say things like, "This is why people don't give second chances, because they get punished for moving on. I thought you were stronger than to believe a stranger over me." If you can't let this go, maybe you're not ready for a real relationship. It was so subtle, but piece by piece, he made the problem me. And when I reached out to friends for advice, the split was brutal. Half of them said, if she's still reaching out, stay out of the drama. It's not worth it. The other half said, Ava, come on. If it smells like smoke, there's fire. I wanted clarity, not a coin toss. So I started pulling back, not from him, but from the questions. I stopped bringing it up because I didn't want another circular argument that ended with me apologizing for even asking. I deleted the woman from my socials, blocked her even, so I could pretend the whole thing wasn't hanging over me like a thundercloud. But inside, I wasn't at peace. I was shrinking. I started policing my own reactions, avoiding certain topics, softening my tone so I wouldn't sound accusatory. It was like I was living in a glass house he had built, afraid that one wrong move would send the whole thing shattering down. And the scariest part? I started believing the possibility that I was overreacting, that maybe she was just bitter, that maybe the love story I thought I was in was still salvageable. I told myself, if he's lying, the truth will show itself. And it did. Once the seed of doubt takes root, your mind becomes an archive. You start pulling old moments off the shelves, dusting them off, and realizing they weren't what you thought at the time. That's what happened to me. I began replaying everything. The weekends he was traveling for work. At first I remembered them fondly. The quiet time to myself, the idea that we were two independent people who could thrive both together and apart. But now, those weekends felt hollow in my memory. I could still hear his voice over the phone, saying he'd just got back to the hotel. His tone distracted, almost mechanical. Back then, I chalked it up to exhaustion. Now, I couldn't stop wondering who else was in the room with him when he said it. The times he rushed me out of his place early. Sometimes it was because he had to work. Other times, because his brother was stopping by or he had errands to run. I never questioned it. I thought, he's an organized guy. He has a life outside of me, but with fresh eyes, I realized those early exits often came before certain dates on his calendar. Ones I now suspected weren't about work at all. The way he never called me at night. It had seemed like such a small thing. He was a morning texter, a midday caller. Nights were his time to unwind. And I respected that. I didn't want to be the clingy girlfriend who needed constant contact, but when I thought about it now, it made perfect sense. Nights were when he was home. With her. The more I rewound, the more I started noticing little fractures I'd smoothed over before. Like the time he said he was at a team dinner but sent a single photo of his food, cropped tight, no people in sight. Or the way he avoided talking about his weekends in detail, giving me vague lines like, it was good, nothing special. And then there were the texts. I went back and scrolled through our history, tracing patterns I hadn't noticed. Every so often, our conversations would just stop. I'd send something light, a meme, a photo of what I was eating, and he'd reply, maybe once or twice. And then, mid-conversation, silence. Sometimes for hours. And when he'd reappear, it was with a casual, sorry, fell asleep, or got caught up in work. It had felt normal at the time. Life gets busy. But now, with everything I knew, those silences looked different. They lined up too neatly with weekends he claimed to be away, or nights he was too tired to talk. It was like I was tracing a shadow I hadn't realized was there. The more I pieced it together, the more my chest tightened. It wasn't just about when he lied. It was about how long he'd been able to look me in the eye and carry on as if nothing was wrong. It meant that every I miss you, every forehead kiss, every lazy Sunday morning we spent together, all of it existed alongside another version of him, a version who belonged to someone else. I wasn't imagining things. I hadn't been paranoid. I'd been deceived, consistently, systematically. The realization didn't come as an explosion. It was more like water seeping in through the cracks, slow but unstoppable, until you're ankle deep and realize you've been sinking the whole time. I stared at my phone that night, scrolling through months of texts, my stomach twisting with each overlap. His excuses weren't random. His silences weren't innocent. They were scheduled, deliberate. And the worst part? He was so good at it, so smooth, so consistent that I'd mistaken his discipline for honesty. I wasn't the main character in his story. I was the intermission, the thing that filled the gaps between acts in a play I didn't even know I was in. I thought reaching out to her would be the hardest part. It wasn't. The hardest part was how easily she said yes. No hesitation, no anger, no defensive stay away from my man energy. Just a calm, clipped response. Sure, let's meet. We agreed on a coffee shop in the middle of the city. Neutral territory. A place with people, noise, and daylight, because I had no idea what to expect, and part of me was still bracing for a fight. When I walked in, I spotted her instantly. Chloe. She wasn't what I'd imagined. Not flashy, not cold. She had a presence, the kind of self-possession you can't fake. Shoulder-length hair, clean makeup, smart blazer. She looked like the sort of woman who had her life together, the sort of woman men usually marry. And apparently, the sort of woman Michael had promised to marry. She stood as I approached, offered her hand, and said my name like she'd been rehearsing it. I don't know what I expected. Maybe hostility, maybe judgment. But her eyes just looked tired. We sat, we ordered coffees, and then she dropped the first grenade. I thought you two were over. That's what he told me. Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was matter of fact, like she was reciting something from a file. I stared at her. Over? We weren't over. We were dating. Exclusively. Or at least I thought we were. She gave a small, bitter smile. That's funny. He told me you were just a friend he'd hooked up with once. Someone who couldn't let it go. It was like hearing an echo of my own conversation with him. The same lines, just reversed. Only now I could see the pattern. He'd been feeding both of us the same story, tailored for the audience. We started comparing timelines, dates, trips, weekends away. It was nauseating. The overlap wasn't occasional. It wasn't a few mistakes spaced months apart. It was constant. Our relationships ran in parallel, almost perfectly, for over a year. When he was traveling for work with me, he was at home with her the next weekend. When he canceled plans with her for family stuff, he was taking me out of the city. He had an entire rotation, down to the details, and we'd both been living in it without realizing. And then, just when I thought my stomach couldn't drop any further, she took a sip of her coffee, looked me straight in the eye, and said it. We were engaged. The words didn't land at first. I blinked. Engaged? She nodded, calm, controlled, like she'd had to say it before. He proposed last year. The wedding was supposed to be next summer. Next summer. I almost laughed. That hollow, hysterical kind of laugh that comes out when your brain can't process the hit. All the while he was holding my face, telling me how much I meant to him, how he'd never felt this way before. He had a fiancé, a venue, a date, probably a suit hanging in his closet. I gripped the coffee cup so tightly my knuckles ached. So what was I then? Her eyes didn't waver. Insurance. She didn't even blink when she said it. If things fell apart between us, you were his safety net. If they didn't, you were just something he'd eventually phase out. I wanted to be angry at her. I wanted to see her as the villain. But looking at her, I realized she wasn't my enemy. She was my mirror. We were both in the same play. We'd just been reading different scripts. We kept talking, filling in the blanks. Every so often, one of us would recall a detail the other hadn't known, a trip, a birthday, an excuse, and we'd both feel the same wave of disgust wash over us. The worst part? He'd been so meticulous, so deliberate, that we almost didn't overlap in a way that would have revealed the truth sooner. He knew exactly how far to push it without letting either of us bump into the other. But here's what he didn't count on. When women start comparing notes, the whole house of cards comes down. By the time I left that coffee shop, I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't even in shock anymore. I was cold in a way that felt like steel setting in my bones. Because now I knew exactly what I'd been. I wasn't the affair. I wasn't the fling. I was the backup plan, the contingency, the warm body he kept on standby in case the real prize, the one he'd publicly claimed, ever slipped away. And that knowledge hit harder than the betrayal itself. Because love, you can lose. Trust, you can break. But being reduced to an option, that's a humiliation that sticks in your skin. I walked home that day with one clear thought replaying in my head. A truth that cut clean and deep. He wasn't dating me because he loved me. He was keeping me because he might need me. I didn't give him a warning shot. No soft, "we need to talk," no chance to rehearse his lies. I walked straight into his apartment one evening, my phone in my hand, every screenshot, every date, every overlap laid out like ammunition. He was standing by the kitchen island, sipping a drink like it was just another night. "Michael," I said, my voice level but loud enough to slice the air. "Sit down." He smirked like I was being dramatic. "What's going on?" I dropped my phone on the counter, screen up. Messages, photos, calendar screenshots. And at the top, a picture of him and Chloe, her hand on his chest, engagement ring catching the light. His face didn't change at first. He just looked at the phone like it was a puzzle he'd seen before. Then he leaned back in the chair and exhaled, long and slow. "So, she told you?" I didn't answer. He rubbed his jaw. "I didn't want to lose either of you." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound I didn't recognize coming out of my own mouth. "That's not love, Michael. That's greed." He started in with his usual lines, how it was complicated, how Chloe and he had history, how I was different and special and meant something. Every sentence felt like a fishing hook, designed to reel me back in. But this time, I wasn't biting. "You're going to pack your things," I said. "You're going to leave, and you're not going to contact me again." He stood, eyes flashing like I'd just insulted him. "Ava, wait. You're not even hearing me." "No," I cut him off. "I've heard everything. For over a year, I've been hearing you." And none of it was the truth. There was a pause. A long one. He stared at me like he was calculating his next move. Then he grabbed his jacket, muttering something under his breath about how I'd regret throwing this away. He got to the door, hand on the handle, and then, without turning around, he dropped the last grenade. "The wedding's still on," he said. I froze. He glanced over his shoulder, smirking. "But it doesn't mean anything." It was almost funny the way he said it, like it was supposed to comfort me, like knowing he'd still marry her, but not mean it somehow made him less of a liar. That was the moment it clicked. Lies aren't accidents. They're not slips of the tongue or harmless omissions. They're strategies, plans, tactics to keep control of the narrative, to keep people exactly where you want them until you decide otherwise. And Michael? He wasn't careless. He was calculated. I didn't say a word. I just opened the door wider. He stepped out, his cologne lingering like smoke after a fire. When the door clicked shut, I locked it. And for the first time in months, I felt air fill my lungs without resistance. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a dramatic ending, no crying in the hallway, no one last conversation. The second that door closed, I blocked his number, deleted our photos, removed him from every corner of my life where he might still be watching. And just like that, the silence started. Not the heavy, suffocating kind I'd been feeling for months, but the clean kind. The kind that leaves space for you to breathe again. I booked a therapy appointment the next morning, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand why I'd ignored my gut for as long as I did. Week by week, I started reclaiming my life. I stopped checking my phone every time it buzzed. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head that would never happen. I stopped making excuses for someone else's behavior and started making decisions that were entirely my own. I moved into a smaller apartment closer to work. No shared closet space, no drawer full of his things, just my space, walls that didn't hold any of his lies. Friends started seeing the difference in me. "You're lighter," one said over coffee. "I'm free," I replied. And I meant it. Because here's the truth. The worst thing about being lied to isn't the lie itself. It's how it convinces you to betray yourself, to doubt what you know, to shrink what you feel, to stay when you should walk. Months earlier, after my last breakup, I'd promised myself I'd never ignore red flags again. And this time, I kept that promise. The moment the pattern revealed itself, I didn't let him explain it away. I didn't wait for proof that would hurt even more. Michael wasn't a mistake I regret. He was the lesson I needed to remember, that privacy in a relationship is fine, but secrecy is poison. I stopped looking for closure from him because I realized I already had it. The evidence was the closure. The truth was the closure. And in the end, it left me with two clear truths I'll carry for the rest of my life. If someone hides you, it's not because they value privacy, it's because they value options. I thought I'd found a safe love, but I just found someone skilled at hiding a double life. And now I know the difference.